o'clock. So I think we'll go ahead and get the webinar started. Let's see. All right, so you guys are attending the second of 2 webinars on integrating pollution prevention into municipal, tribal, and territorial stormwater programs. Today's webinar is going to be on case studies from EPA Region 2 communities, and we're excited to have several guest speakers here. So just a little bit of background that this is an EPA project. So I do have once I can change my slide, there we go. Disclosure statement that the information in this presentation has been funded wholly in part by the EPA under the grant to Center for Watershed Protection, but it has not gone through the agency's publication review process and therefore may not necessarily reflect the views of the agencies. So we're going to start with just a little bit about the webcast format. We have several communities within Region 2 that may have non-native English speakers. There is an option through the Zoom app to turn on captions in a preferred language. So how you do that is if you go down to those 3 ellipses on the bottom, and then it'll bring up more options and you can show captions. Then you can select your language of choice and save that. And then you should start seeing captions in your preferred language at the bottom of this webcast. In terms of professional development hours, we will be sending all registered attendees who attend the entire webcast a certificate of completion template that can be populated with your name. And you can use that to submit for PDH or CEUs, but just a note that the requirements for these do vary by state, and so you should confirm with your regulating board or certifying board that they will count for this webinar. Today's webcast and the previous webcast a couple weeks ago on this project are being recorded, and there will be the English version that we're recording right now with Spanish captions available on the Toolkit website, which you can access through this QR code or the website link or pathway below. Okay, so best management practices for webcast participation. Throughout the webcast, there's going to be several poll questions. To answer those, you can it'll pop up in front of your screen. You can select your choice. If you select others, then it's great to have feedback in the chat so that we can get a full sense of who's attending and the full scope of answers potentially. So how you access that chat box is the same way I showed you with captions. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's ways that there's 2 sort of groups you can chat with. You can chat with everyone, which would include all the panelists as well as anyone attending the webcast. If you have a question for just the speakers or hosts, you can select chat with all panelists, and that will just go to myself and their speakers. Let's see, next is audio control. Everyone has been muted just to help prevent distractions for our speakers. So if you do have questions, we do hope you have questions as you go through the webcast related to the content or others. You can type those into the chat box, and that we'll be monitoring that throughout the webcast and relaying those to speakers. There will be a post-webcast evaluation form. This is a really helpful form for us to make sure we have a good understanding of how useful the material is, and it helps inform future webcasts that we do. Please fill out the evaluation form at the end of the webcast. Thank you. All right, first poll question. Where in EPA Region 2 do you work? New York, New Jersey, Indian Nations, U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, or you are not currently within EPA Region 2. Give people a minute or so to answer. let's see. Looks like the response rate has slowed, so we can share this poll. It looks like most people are not in EPA Region 2. Several people from New York, a couple from New Jersey and Puerto Rico. That's great. Thank you guys all for attending. I think that a lot of the stuff we'll be talking about in this webcast will be applicable outside of Region 2 as well. Let's see, next poll question. How many people are participating in the webcast today at your location? Just you, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, or more than 10? All right, I think we can share. That's about the response we got last time. Looks like a lot of people are on their own today. Thank you all again for attending this and fitting this into your day. I have a couple more poll questions. Poll question number 3, who are you representing today? Municipality or local government, a state government, federal government, an Indian nation, United States territory, private consultant, nonprofit organization, a university, researcher or academia, or other. All right, I think that's about where we are getting response rates. So it looks like we have a lot of people from municipalities, some other governments, a couple private consultants, and a couple other entities as well. Thank you guys. All right, last poll question for, I believe, the whole day. What is your role in municipal, tribal, or territorial operations? Administrative or coordinator, compliance inspector, an engineer or specialist, monitoring, planning, field staff, boots on the ground, or other. Let's see. All right, we can share the poll. We have several coordinators, some compliance inspectors, and a couple of engineers or specialists, one field staff, and a couple other roles as well. All right, let's see. So I'm just going to share briefly a little bit about the Center for Watershed Protection. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with our group. We are a national nonprofit that was founded in 1992 with the mission to advance clean water resources and healthy ecosystems through responsible land and water management. We have currently 22 staff. Our headquarters are in Maryland, but we do have offices mostly along the East Coast, but a little bit into the Midwest as well. We have 4 programs within the center. We have applied research, membership program, training and education, and watershed and stormwater consulting services. So our webcast today, we're going to be looking at specifically with this EPA project, we're going to give you a little project background. And then we have different people presenting on some of the on-the-ground implementation within this subject area, which is kind of a niche, and we'll get into that in a moment. But we do have a presenter from the Virgin Islands. We have a presenter from SUNY. We have a presenter, actually a member of the Center for Watershed Protection, who coordinated with the St. Regis Mohawk tribe on their native plant nursery. So we'll be able to hear all that. And then we'll end with some questions, general questions, and wrap up. Okay. Now we're going to get into the meat of the presentation. I don't actually think I introduced myself until right now. So I'm Adrienne Cizik. I'm a senior watershed resources engineer at the Center for Watershed Protection, and I was the project manager for this project, although my team was quite large and I had a lot of help from staff at the center. So, and you'll hear from one of them today. as well. So this grant is originally called Pollution Prevention and Good Housekeeping Toolkit and Trainings. It started in June 2023, and it's actually ending this week officially, which we're excited to be able to share the results of that today. One of the main things that came from this grant is that we developed an online toolkit around pollution prevention and good housekeeping guidance. It includes tools and training opportunities. We also coordinated with people on pollution prevention training directly, and the grant was to serve all Region 2 communities, which includes New York, New Jersey, Indian Nations, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. This grant and its expected outcome for the grant was to advance the capacity of municipal, territorial, and tribal governments and other organizations within Region 2 to prevent and reduce pollution, particularly in stormwater runoff that was sourced from governmental operations. So that it's a little bit of, there's a lot of words there, and I'm just going to break it down a little bit because I think it's a little bit of a niche what we're looking at. So let's start with pollution prevention. Pollution prevention is any practice that reduces or eliminates or prevents pollution at its source before it's created. So if you look at this chart on the right, it's sort of the waste management process, and the most preferred option would be pollution prevention, which basically means not making the pollutant in the first place, so reducing that source. And then after that, there's reuse, recycling, treatment, and disposal release. So, for example, in stormwater, we often we do a little bit of pollutant prevention just in how we approach it, but typically we're looking at more of the treatment side of that through BMPs. So that doesn't fit into the pollution prevention specifically, that sort of category of action. So we're looking to prioritize this within this project. With pollution prevention, there's a lot of co-benefits, and these can be cost savings, protecting public health, reducing water and energy use. Traditionally, P2 is aimed towards industry, and we look at equipment or technology modifications, process or procedure modifications, reformulation or redesign of products, substitution of materials, and improvements in other processes, housekeeping, maintenance, things like that. However, a lot of these things can be also applied to government operations, and that's what we're starting to do with this project. Okay, so good housekeeping is slightly different. It does often include some aspects of pollution prevention, but it is a term used often under the minimum control measure number 6 for MS4 permits. So an MS4 permit is a municipal separate storm sewer system permit, which is directly related to stormwater pollution. And so some of the requirements under that control measure are to prevent or reduce the amount of stormwater pollution generated by municipal operations and conveyed into receiving waters. You're required to train employees on how to incorporate good housekeeping techniques into municipal operations and identify appropriate management practice and measurable goals for preventing or reducing the amount of stormwater pollution generated by municipal operations. So the point of that is that there's a lot of areas to look at specifically around municipal operations where you can reduce pollutants entering the stormwater system. So a smaller subset of that is actually P2, and we'll look at that in a second. Some of these activities that fall under this pollution prevention good housekeeping are hot spot facility management, street sweeping, storm drain maintenance, landscape maintenance, vehicle maintenance, building maintenance, a lot of maintenance aspects, roadway salting and storage. Okay, so again, this project is kind of narrowing this down a little bit and looking at this intersection between good housekeeping, which is keeping the pollutants from getting into the stormwater, and P2, which is reducing the amount of pollutants generated as a whole. And so we're looking at that in the context of not just municipal operations, but because we're looking at all of EPA Region 2, we're looking at it to include territorial and tribal government operations. Okay, so there are a lot of variety of regulatory statuses within Region 2. So if we look at by geographic area, New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico all have established MS4s. So that means that we have those existing regulations in place where you already have these actions around P2 and good housekeeping, and so that we can kind of hone in on that, these actions already in place to find that nexus and look at some of these more specific P2 good housekeeping actions. I guess the difference between New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico is that the MS4 permit in Puerto Rico is implemented by EPA. When you look at USVI and Indian nations, there still is EPA regulatory authority on discharge permits, but there are not established MS4 permits. There's also not municipalities, and those discharge permits will vary significantly both between both USVI and Indian nations, but also within the Indian nations, they also vary. So there's not a sort of established good housekeeping P2 framework there yet, and so we're looking at finding ways that it could be incorporated into the existing actions that they have going on too. Okay, so our approach to this project is that no one's really looking at this niche, so we do need to be somewhat innovative in how we approach it. We did convene a P2 advisory committee in the fall of 2024, and they've been helping us flesh out our approach and the toolkit as a whole. And so they've been they've been working with us since that time. And we also don't want to make P2 an additional requirement or a burden for government entities. We really wanted to focus on what communities were already doing and helping them make connections between programs and then quantify the benefits of those so that you can support ongoing work in those programs. We also wanted to help communities implement the actions, and to do that we tried to identify communities that were already doing things. That's where the case studies come in that we're talking about today, but also created some guidance tools within the toolkit. And we wanted to keep the focus on this nexus point. P2 is huge, good housekeeping can be huge, and so like really honing in on that nexus point. So looking at P2, stormwater, and government operations as a whole. Our toolkit, like I mentioned, first webcast, we went through the toolkit and went through all the tools in there. So I'm not going to be doing that, but you can access that webinar on the toolkit. This QR code will get you there to the toolkit as a whole. But we did decide to go with an online platform because it is easy to access from different devices. It can be searchable, so we can really hone in on what the user needs. It supports multiple types of resources, so we do have document resources, we'll have videos, we have links, we have calculator tools on there as well. And it does allow for interactive tools like those calculators. We also have an interactive municipal operation assessment tool, and then it allows for accessibility. So within the toolkit, there's a toolbar that you can translate into different languages. You also can have it read to you. So for traditional obstacles to the websites, we were able to provide accessibility to overcome those. So within the toolkit, there are several resources. We did do a review of existing resources to fit into that toolkit that address some of those P2 opportunities within governmental operations. We've tried to prioritize EPA Region 2 resources. Once we did that, we identified gaps and filled with resources outside of EPA Region 2. And then we looked for a variety of types of resources. So we included manuals, guides, tools, checklists, example codes and regulations, outreach materials, and other case studies. We also looked at what resources were still needing to be created to both fill gaps, but also connect the dots between all these sort of accumulation of resources. So we did create new resources. One of them was this opportunities assessment tool, which is on the website. We did an impact assessment tools, which is Stormwater P2 calculator suite. You can also access that through the toolkit, and those were talked about in the first webcast if you want to get more of an introduction to those. And then we did create these case studies of communities within the EPA Region 2 that were putting these on the ground actions. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So if you followed that QR code to the toolkit, we have some featured resources. Like, as I mentioned, we have the operations assessment, the calculator, we have the webinars. Those are all in a featured resource menu. And then we have the case studies, which is, again, what we are talking about today. I did want to acknowledge the full suite of case study contributors to the toolkit. We had Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Let's see. Melissa, did you have a question? Sorry, it popped up. Can you type it? I guess you can't talk because you're muted, but if you wanted to type it into the chat, that would be helpful. Because I won't be able to hear you otherwise. But I'll just go through this list, and then I have a break point so we can address some questions. That's a good time. So case study contributors were Rutgers Cooperative Extension. They have a case study on New Jersey's pre-audit checklist for municipal yards, and a right to know floodplain outreach program. SUNY will be presenting today on their elimination of single-use plastics. Virgin Islands Conservation VIX. I'm gonna let Sienna share exactly what that stands for. I apologize, Sienna. They have a Clean Coast program, and they had refill stations installed. New York State Department of Environmental Conservation have a zero emissions for lawn equipment that we talk about. And the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Native Plant Nursery will also be talked about today. And then there was a City of Kingston, New York Green Procurement initiative that is in a case study on the toolkit as well. Oh, that's my last slide for this section. Okay, so if you guys do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat section. Looks like Melissa, that was not a question. No problem at all. I think that's it for right now. So we can transition to our next speaker, which is Virgin Islands, or VIX.
Good morning. Let me share my screen. Can you all see the slides?
I can see them, yep.
Okay. All right. So, hello, my name is Sienna. I'm the Deputy Director for VIX, which is the Virgin Islands Conservation Society. And today I'll talk about, as Adrian said, pollution prevention in the USVI and our initiative, Refill Bottles, Not Dumpsters. See if this works. Can you see the next slide now? Is it working?
I can. It was a little delayed, but yeah, I can see it now.
Okay. Yes, apologies if the Wi-Fi is a little off. So a little bit of background about VIX. We're actually the oldest nonprofit in the Virgin Islands. We're an environmental nonprofit that focuses on conservation, education, sustainable development, and environmental awareness. We are also the national affiliate for the National Wildlife Federation. We are the USVI representative. And we have 4 different programs that we run. We have VI Recycling, we have Blue Flag, Eco Schools, USVI, and VI Clean Coast. Both the Eco Schools program and the Blue Flag program are part of the International Foundation for Environmental Education. We are the VI affiliate for those as well. But today we'll dive into the VI Clean Coast side of it. Before I go into the program, I wanted to kind of touch on the pollution challenges that we have in the USVI. They can be a little bit different than you see in the States. First of all, we have, if you're not familiar with the Virgin Islands, we have 3 main islands. We have St. John, St. Thomas, and St. Croix. Especially on St. Thomas, we have a growing population on an island with limited space. So we already have an overflowing landfill. It's been this way for the past few years. Um, and this overflowing landfill, of course, increases the litter that's all around the island, and then stormwater runoff carries it into our waters and our coastlines. Another major problem that we have is that we have minimal composting and recycling infrastructure on the island. We have nothing on the municipal or territory-wide level. So we have to rely on small organizations, often nonprofits that are, dependent on funding and that kind of thing. Like we have our small VI recycling program, which is 100% volunteer led. It's once a week, and the market that's here actually donates the truck and the shipping to ship it off island. So even in that small operation, it's not the most effective it could be. So it really only leaves local residents with one option, which is to add to the landfill. And then the third major problem that we have limited drinking water access, and there's a huge distrust. I'll touch on it more as I go into the program. But the issue with this distrust is because we have aging infrastructure, and a lot of us depend on cisterns. So if they're not filtered properly, then the water is then unable to be or undrinkable. So this distrust, the temporary solution is to use plastic water bottles. And I think we can all say that those are not the best solution. So due to these problems, we have 200,000 tons of waste disposed annually in our territory. And that's about 40% more per person than you would see in the States. So it's a growing problem. And what came of that for us was that we created VI Clean Coast. This program started in 2018 in partnership with the Department of Planning and Natural Resources down here, DPNR, specifically their Coastal Zone Management Division. We've been working in partnership with them since 2018, and we have 4 initiatives that have grown out of that. We have eco certification that is also pollution prevention oriented. We target local businesses, specifically food serving businesses, to help them switch from single-use items to reusables. We have refill bottles, not dumpsters, which I'll dive into after this. We have stormwater resilience and outreach to reduce erosion damage and, like I said, litter being swept off into the ocean. And then we have Clear Waters, which focuses on things like pump out in marinas and improved water quality. So refill bottles, not dumpsters. This initiative started 2 years after VI Clean Coast, so 2020. And it's really expanded. It's actually one of my personal favorite ones. The goals of this program are to eliminate polystyrene, which is styrofoam. This one is bridged with eco certification, that other initiative I mentioned. And then also to reduce single-use plastic bottles and to increase environmental education and engaging students in waste reduction actions. We really try to get them on their campus, creating these environmental stewards. They take ownership of it. They're doing these actions alongside with us. So some of these waste reduction actions, we install water stations in schools and businesses. We distribute reusable water bottles to students. And then we have presentations to students on water testing, filtration, and pollution prevention. So the reason this initiative is unique for us is that we actually bridged VI Clean Coast with our sister program, Eco Schools, because we really want to capture both the technical assistance side of installing these water stations along with the education and outreach portion of it. So Eco Schools has that network with the schools and the relationships. And they come in and do the presentations with students, and then VI Clean Coast comes in with the water stations and shows the technical side of it. We're very lucky down here. VIX has a 5-year MOU with the Virgin Islands Department of Education as well. So we work hand in hand with them to try and get this implemented into the curriculum and part of the daily life of students. It also has expanded, which is great to see. A lot of the schools, after we started this refill bottles initiative with them, they decided to take it upon themselves to expand to things like recycling programs, school gardening and composting, and then water testing and filtration lessons. This one I would really like to see expanded a little bit more. We've only been able to touch on it, and I'll go into that a little bit. We have had, since 2018, we've had a course of funding from DPNR, EPA, and NOAA, but it is funding reliant, so it does cause ebb and flow in our project implementation. Unfortunately, we have not reached that level of annual consistent funding for it. So some of the highlights of this program, we have 35 water stations / filtration kits in total across the territory. These go to all sorts of things. We have schools, we have local businesses, we have service-oriented organizations, so other nonprofits. We have the university here. So we try to reach as much of our audience as possible. Of those 35 water stations, 20 of those are in schools. This number is a little bit higher than was originally in our case study because we just finished a subaward with DPNR and we just had a bunch installed this week. There's currently one being installed right now at a school. So we're very excited that that was able to be done. Of those, if you've ever used the LK water stations, there's a little ticker on the side that like every time you use the water bottle, it will show you that you've basically saved a plastic water bottle from entering a landfill. And that's where we got this number of 320,000 plus plastic bottles diverted from the landfill. Now, one of the challenges we have due to capacity and funding is that we don't have a steady way to collect this data. So that number realistically is much higher. We have not yet figured out the best way to streamline collecting this data from all these water stations. I also wanted to mention, which I'll go into in a little bit, the water stations in this 20, it's water stations, atmospheric water generators, and filtration kits. So it's kind of a variety. The thing that we really pride ourselves on is this one-on-one consultation with schools or businesses, because every business, every school, the operation is different, the campus is different, the infrastructure is different. So we really try to work with them to figure out what would work best for them, because there's no point in us putting in a water station that then goes to disuse in 1 or 2 years. And then we've also distributed over 5,000 aluminum water bottles to students. This is when we do those presentations. We do school-wide assemblies and teach the students the importance of using these reusable water bottles rather than their plastic ones, both for the environment, but also for their own health as well. So I kind of touched on it, but we have about 3 different types that we have put in. We have your traditional bottle filling station. Some people just call it water station. There's different models. Bottle filling is when you put your bottle on and it fills it up. And then there's like the bubbler, then it's a water station. The brand we use most is LK. We've tried a few different others, but we found that LK is the most consistent. It does well in our climate down here. And you also see it all over the states as well. So it's a very reliable company. So we have installed those. The majority of our stations are those. The issue is that we need a contractor to come in and install them for us because we're not experts on this. So it just takes another level to get those in there. The atmospheric water generator is really interesting. This was a new unit that we found about 1.5 years ago. And we noticed that a couple of different businesses and one school, they have plumbing issues and water infrastructure beyond what we can help with. So they didn't want the LK water stations because you need the electrical outlet and then you also need a water outlet. So even if you put that in there, the water would not be good to drink. We didn't want to recommend it to students. So we found this solution, this atmospheric water generator. We use one specific company so far, but we're looking to do research for more, just to try different ones, see what works best. And if you have never seen one of these, they're really cool. They're basically a dehumidifier with a bunch of filters in it, and then you can drink your water. This picture is from the Red Hook Dive Center here. And they said as soon as they got it, they fill up like coolers, let it run all night, and then they use it for all of their boating trips. Any people that come in, they open it to the public, so you don't have to buy anything at their store. You can just come in and fill up your water bottle. They said it's a lifesaver. And they also said that their air conditioning bill actually went down because it reduced the humidity. So they're in love with it. There's a couple of pros and cons to it. We weren't sure how it would do in schools because it's a little bit easier to steal, vandalize. It doesn't do as well outside. And we were kind of worried that like maybe it wouldn't make enough water either. It makes up to 8 gallons of water a day. Um, but we've never measured how much students drink in a day, so we weren't sure if that would be enough. So we just put one in this week at an elementary school here because they're on a cistern and their cistern isn't working. So right now they have zero access to clean drinking water. It's literally coolers that the principals and teachers bring in on their own. So we put in one of these as a pilot to see how well it would go. And we're actually going to go back next week to talk to them about it, explain exactly what the filters do, why they should use their reusable water bottles, and kind of get some feedback on it. And then the third option that we have are these retrofitted filtration kits. So last year, our Eco Schools coordinator and our VI Clean Coast coordinator teamed up and went across to every public school in St. Thomas. It was 7 schools, which equates to about 44 water stations. And we marked them. We checked the condition of them. We checked if they were working, if they were filtered, what model number they were, serial number where they were. And we have it all in this log. We call it our St. Thomas inventory. And we shared that with VIDE and the Bureau of School Construction and Maintenance. They have it as a separate division here. So we shared it with them so they can use it as a tool to keep track of all these water stations and do the schools have proper water access. They were very open to a collaboration and a partnership that we hope to continue. But of course, it's funding dependent. So we would like to do it in St. Croix. We would like to do it in St. John. But even if we haven't been able to actually implement putting in water stations, it has helped increase our knowledge and get anecdotal information from teachers and students as well, to see why they're not using it. For example, we went to one school and the water station worked fine. It was operating, it was filtered, and it looked like no one had used it in years. And we asked them, we're like, what's going on? And they said, oh, the teacher said this to us. They were like, oh, the students don't like to use it because it's next to the bathroom. And we're like, well, the bathroom, the toilet water is not the same as the water station. And it takes a lot of convincing. Even the teacher said they didn't really want to use it. So we kind of were able to gather this feedback and talk to the Bureau of School Construction to see what we can do about it. We did the math and it would take us about $60,000 to fix every single water station across St. Thomas so that each school could say, yes, we're 100% up and operating with our water stations. The great thing about these filtration kits, we notice that there's a lot of stations here that they're operating okay. They're connected to water. They're connected to power. They're just not filtered. So students don't want to use them because they either taste weird or smell weird. Completely understandable. So you can get these filtration kits. They're about $150. You just get them off of Amazon and they're easy enough to install that we don't need a contractor to come in. Our coordinators have done it. I've done it. You put in this filtration kit and then it's like a brand new station. And whenever we're there, this picture is from an elementary school. And when we were putting it in, a couple students walked by, asked what we were doing. We explained it to them and we had them do a taste test. And these kids, they're like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And one of them goes, wow, it doesn't taste like metal anymore. We're like, yeah, it's filtered. That's what we want to hear. We also went to a high school recently and did the same thing, put in a filtration kit. And I asked the high school students, I said, do you use these stations when you walk down the hallway? And they said, no. They said, we bring our own plastic water bottles. I asked why. They said, the teachers say it's safe. They show us drinking from it, but then we go home and our parents say no, and they give us the plastic water bottles. They basically, they don't trust it. And I said to them, I said, okay, well, there's 2 in your school that are filtered. We put a sign, you can kind of see the signs here. Put a sign up next to it. I said, if you see those, that means it's filtered. I personally have put that in there. Like, give it a try, see what you think. And they tried it and they said, wow, it tastes like real water. And I gave them their water bottles and we'll hopefully follow back up and see that they're still using it. But it's something that's like it's a continual relationship that we need to build. They need to trust us so they can trust the water station, and tell their parents to trust it. So it's an ongoing educational experience, absolutely. And then looking forward for us, we definitely want to increase drinking water access. We would like to install as many water stations, filtration kits, water generators we can. We want to complete the St. Croix and St. John inventory to provide that to the Bureau of School Construction. Um, we would like to conduct water testing in schools and increase water quality and pollution prevention education. So we'd like to see our Eco Schools coordinator in schools more often with Water Heroes curriculum or water quality curriculum to get that education. And then I'll go back to the water testing real quick. This has been a continual question for us. Every time we put in a water station, we get it from teachers, students, parents. They want to know if it's tested and how they can do it and if they can trust it. The unfortunate thing is that we don't have the funding or capacity to do this water testing. We're also not water quality experts. We would have to team up with someone from UVI or water testing lab on island. So we haven't yet done it, but it is definitely the next step, I think, for this program to really elevate that trust with the public and to show them how exactly the filtration works, what the water test results show, and why they can trust these water stations that are coming into their island and that they'll start seeing around more and more. We also go to events, as you can see in this picture, to increase that education and outreach as well. So I think that's it for me. Let me go here.
Thank you, Sienna. That was a great presentation. Let's see, there is one question that came in so far. Do you have issues with fish carcasses from fishers? I am working with a state park that is looking for good solutions for fish waste. So not necessarily directly related to the water reuse, but if you have any advice for Rachel?
Don't have any on that right now. That would be something that DPNR, the Department of Planning and Natural Resources, they would probably have some sort of grant and then they would reach out to us to help implement it. But that is not something I've heard of.
Excellent. All right. There was a question that came in about the toolkit. I'm just going to share. They had a question about that there's a lot of resources sort of all in that toolkit, and is there a way to narrow it down? And I did want to point out that there is a couple avenues within the toolkit for like of how you would approach it depending on where you are, and one of those is a municipal assessment tool or a opportunities assessment tool, and that would be a great way to come into that toolkit. I know that water refill stations is one of the things that we highlight as an option for P2 within that, so that might be one of the actions you end up getting. Any other questions for Sienna? All right. Well, thank you so much, Sienna. That was a fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
I look actually forward. I would love to hear more about, and I will reach out to you about the building of trust. That seems like such a unique obstacle for sure.
It is. Mm-hmm.
All right. So next is Sadie with SUNY.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sadie SUNY, the Director of Sustainability and Climate Action. And are you taking a look at my slides? You can see my slides. Mm-hmm. Hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. And I can
okay, great. Thank you. Great. So today I'm going to talk about a policy that the State University of New York created. And it's in a university setting, but hopefully there's some principles that can apply to municipalities or other types of institutions. So first, a little bit about SUNY. I did notice there's a couple of people here from New York, so hello. So the State University of New York has 64 campuses, and that is a mixture of about 30 state-operated campuses and then 34 community colleges, which are operated with a hybrid between the state and the county community. We have everything from 2-year technical schools, 4-year schools, and then also our university centers, which are very large schools serving about, I think, 12 to 20,000. And they are PhD and doctoral. I work not at one of the campuses. I work at the system administration level. So like a New York State government. I'm in Albany, New York, and I do a lot of policy work with all 64 campuses that has anything related with sustainability and climate action. And we do have our SUNY Climate and Sustainability Action Plan that lays out the path for all 64 campuses towards decarbonization, reduction of waste, inclusion, academics, research, and of course, waste and plastics are part of that climate action plan, sustainability climate action plan. But the plastics policy is, yes, part of our plan, but it's also a little bit more than that. So in November of 2021, New York State passed a bill that requires SUNY and CUNY being the City University of New York, which is slightly different and separate from the State University of New York, because of course, New York City is such a large area of its own. And it asked us to increase waste diversion and create a plan for the reduction of an elimination and reduction of plastics. And we had to work with the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees were the ones that were required to make this happen. Our Board of Trustees made the decision for just across the board policy of complete elimination. And in order to develop this policy, 38 volunteers from 28 different campuses came together. It was a big stakeholder effort because they wanted to make it realistic and possible and doable. And so we need a lot of stakeholder involvement to do that. Of course, it is the state, it is government. It took a long time for the policy to be created and then pass. We wanted the governor's office to bless it and say that this is what they were intending when the bill was passed. So it didn't actually take effect until April of 2025, but many campuses knew it was coming and got started on some of the implementation earlier. So a year later, all of our baseline data was collected from all of the 64 campuses. And a year after that, some implementation data was collected. Just recently, I brought together some of the people from the original policy development committee. And in the effort of continual improvement and just closing that policy cycle, taking a look at our data and talking about experiences of implementation and saying what needs to change, what in this policy and procedures needs to change. So a little bit about the policy highlights. So we do not allow photodegradable plastics, which is a lot of, like, some of our vendors have a hard time getting over that because they say, well, it degrades, but photodegradable plastics are still turned into microplastics in the environment. And so that would not complete our goals, which is, again, to stay out of the landfill, but to stay out of the waters. We do allow compostable plastic, but it's only allowed if it's actually composted. And we do allow reusable plastics if it's actually reused over and over again. It's not easy to find a composting facility that will take BPI certified or other types of compostable plastic, but there are a few around New York, and we do have a map of those. So we took all of the different types of plastic and we broke it down into 7 different categories, we broke it down into 7 different types of plastic, and then we broke it down to even smaller categories after that. And each one of those categories, those smaller categories, has a different phase out date, because again, we wanted to make this realistic. But we wanted to also make it a very stringent phase out dates. So if something was going to be a little bit hard to phase out, we didn't want that to hold up the fact that the easier things in that category could be phased out. So we broke it down and we made different dates. And you can see that on our plastics procedures, which are online. We do have hospitals. We have a couple of teaching hospitals, and they do have some exemptions. The scope of this is a little bit different than a lot of other New York State laws or New York State executive orders in the sense that it does not just affect our state operated campuses, and it does not just apply to the things that are bought with state money. This is a Board of Trustees policy. So through their power, we were able to say that this policy applies to state operated campuses, community colleges, our research foundation, our our 501c3s, advancement foundations, our school clubs, all of the auxiliary services. This is a very broad policy that applies to absolutely everyone, and that's a bit different than a lot of our other sustainability policies or requirements. The reporting requirement is the part that system administration oversees, and we actually ask every single campus to provide us with the number of every single pieces of plastic, of single-use plastic that they buy. So that means, did you buy cups? Okay, were they cold cups? Were they hot cups? Were they lids? How about the straws? What size were they? Did you buy a pack of 8-ounce cups that comes 25 to a cup and you bought 25 packs of that? So we do this for every single category. We collect the numbers. And then we also get from people what their contracts say and when their contracts expire and what types of contracts they have, what their university or their campus recycling plan is. And then every year we collect narrative stories of success and barriers. Here's just a screenshot of our reporting template, which is really overwhelming. And I put it there because I wanted to sort of show you how overwhelming it is and maybe just keep this in mind when we start talking about continuous improvement. So during the implementation, one thing that we found is that you have to say things 100 times because just throwing it, I mean, everybody knew that this policy was coming. But as they start to implement, they hear things and they're like, wait a minute, that applies to me? Like, yeah, that applies to you. This means you too. And then the other thing is like, oh, wait a minute, you mean I can't even use balloons? Like, no, balloons are plastic, right? So it was like, once implementation began and reality set in, you just have to sort of keep saying the same things over and over and over again for it to really sink in, like how big of a deal this is and how things have to change. So lots of different sort of tentacles of communication were very important. But when it comes to implementation, that is not central to system administration. So we do not tell the campuses how to implement this policy or what they can or cannot do. All of our campuses are autonomous. They all have their own policies, their own procedures of how to buy things and what they are allowed to buy other than plastic. So we can't control their procurement or their operations because there's 64 different types of them. And so some of them are very centralized, which I think makes policy implementation very easy because all of procurement has to go through this one point of sale system, or they have to funnel through this one office with approvers, and that's great. But a lot of these campuses are decentralized where people have a lot of different ways to buy things, and the purchasing comes from a lot of different people across campus. So every campus has got to find their own way to implement this policy. The other thing I did want to say about that is once system administration put the policy out there, we do not tell the campuses what they can and cannot use. A lot of questions will come back and say, if I can't use this balloon, can I use this balloon? If I can't use, this says it's reusable, so do you think I could buy it? system admin is not the person who interprets that policy. I always direct them towards their risk management or compliance officer for policy interpretation. But what I do is I file that feedback away because I say, if enough people don't understand what can and cannot be used, that probably means the definitions on our policy are not clear enough. So what did we find? So this graph here divides up state-operated campuses in dark blue and community colleges in the lighter blue. And you can see that it has this 7 different larger category types of plastics. And we can see from the light blue that the community colleges are doing a great job reducing balloons, beverage bottles, food service products, where the state-operated campuses are reducing more bags, straws and stirs, and wraps. But also keep in mind that the community colleges have lower numbers of everything. And so not only do they purchase less, but they also often respond less because they are not used to doing sustainability reporting centrally. The state-operated campuses are, because again, a lot of our policies, laws, and such executive orders apply to them, but they don't apply to the community colleges. So the community colleges are slowly getting used to doing like central compliance reporting. So sometimes their numbers are a little bit different just based on the quantity and quality of the data. But regardless, we do have some very large community colleges. So I'm not really sure what this graph really has to say about governance and what governance has to do with policy implementation. But I'll just say that sometimes it might be easier for the community colleges because they're small, so they can be nimble. And they can change their operations and their communication flow is easier, but sometimes it can be harder for them because they're small and they have less of a market pull. So not much that I can really grab out of this, but I just wanted to sort of show this data. So this graph here is putting the community colleges and the state-operated campuses together with those same types of plastic. And in this graph, the blue lines is the number of items that were purchased. So literally like the number of bottles, the number of bags. And then the pink line is the amount of reduction that has occurred since the baseline year. And so you'll notice that the right hand goes from zeros at the top and then 90s at the bottom. So the lowest point on the line is actually the greatest amount of reduction. And this graph shows a couple of things. So first, we really can't get too excited about the large decreases, but because the quantities are so small that even the smallest change can lead to a drastic change in numbers. So we can take a look at these straws and stirs and spill plugs. 80% reduction looks great. Okay, but we really don't buy that much of it. So is the quality of that data very good? And then 2, we want to focus on the plastic types that have the most quantities, not necessarily the plastic types that have the least decrease. So for example, wraps and packaging only has a 47% decrease, and food service products have a decrease of 28%. Oh, that's flip-flop. But regardless, we want to focus on the food service products because we buy the most of it. So it's just sort of the idea of like, okay, where are we going to focus? Let's not just focus on things that are not decreasing. Even if the large things like food service products is decreasing, we still want to focus on that because we buy so much of it. But in order to really tell the story from the data, we have to break things up, and break things up we do. It's a lot of data. So in this slide here, you can see the overall elimination of the plastics actually follows the trend of control by the campus. So the retail dining halls are those pay one price dining halls where the students pay for it at the beginning of the term, and then they can go in and they can eat whatever they want. The cafes and grab and go, the students have like a declining balance, or they can pay by cash. And that's where there's usually going to be like a secondary vendor. It's probably a vendor who is contracted from the retail dining vendor, but it's a one-off vendor. And then there's the national chains. So our campuses have Starbucks, they have Taco Bell, they have all of these kinds of things. So it's interesting to see sort of the less control that we have over the operations, the less plastic that we see decreasing. But we actually divide it down to even more than this. So every single type of plastic, every single category of plastic is counted within these different operational subsets. So we actually know in the retail dining how many cold cups were purchased versus how many cold cups were purchased in the cafe grab and goes, and how many cold cups were purchased in national chains, and how many lids were purchased for the retail dining and this and that. So why is that so important? Because if you remember back in our last slide, we saw that there was a lump plastic type of stirs, straws, and spill plugs. Well, when we go into that data, what we notice is that there was the least amount of change was from the spill plugs. And to me, the spill plugs should be the easiest thing to phase out because you really don't need a spill plug. So that's like a low hanging fruit, right? That we should really be working on, but we would have just looked at that and been like, oh, 80%, don't even worry about that. And then we would have missed that low hanging fruit. So this is just a chart of what we have found is the largest quantities of the things that are purchased across campuses. And so what we should really be focusing on. So in summary, the community colleges and the state operated have different operational challenges. Some of the biggest changes are the things that people can do without, like straws and balloons, and balloon releases, which is a subset of balloons. And food service products have a decent sized change given the quantity. However, don't forget that this is the government and politics always plays a role. So sometimes the data does not tell you the things that some people care the most about. And I can tell you that our board of trustees and our chancellors, they care about balloons and they care about plastic water bottles. So we've got to focus on those things. So a couple of our recommendations are we've got to get some better data. And since the data is getting better and better and better as the time goes on, which is normal and natural. So we want to really start focusing on year over year change instead of baseline, because our baseline data is not quite right. We've got to strengthen our vendor connections. We saw that in that graph. The best success is the reusable systems. Like we heard, the water filler systems, because water bottles is one of our smallest across every area, and also the to-go containers. So reusable systems, we got to increase those and to target high volume categories. So looking forward to policy improvements and a path to implementation, one of our champions had said, we can't grassroots our way through this one. And I love that quote because it's so true. So much of sustainability work is done by an office of one. And our appeal to creating public is just the fact that we create public value and we're often speaking for the students. And so that's how we get things done. That's how we get champions. But this is like a David and Goliath situation with plastics. And I feel like as we are eliminating it, there's just more and more of it out there. So we need a new approach. We can't really grassroots this. So what can we do? We do rely on our students to advocate, not just to change their own behavior as consumers. We're not trying to put this on the consumers. But when they advocate for a policy, then that policy occurs. Like administration finds a way to implement that policy that they are advocating for. So we want them to advocate for this policy. But unfortunately, they do come and go. They are students, they graduate. And often there's like a gap between what they say they want and then what they'll actually go and buy when they get to the dining hall. So even if we do offer an alternative, sometimes that when they vote with their dollar, they don't buy the alternative because it might be a little bit more money or it's different. We need to change our contracts when they expire. Every campus has got to find their own way to have some internal controls and enforcement. Um, and this policy was SUNY wide because it was meant to capitalize on our collective buying power. So if there's one or two campuses that are not enforcing it, they don't have good internal controls, it weakens the integrity of the intention of our policy. So we've got to compete with market forces. And also we have to be profitable. So we're already a public institution. All of our campuses are. There's not a lot of extra money floating around for the dining halls. These dining halls have got to be competitive. So this is a couple of success areas, and I don't necessarily want to read them all to you, but I'll just say that the best thing that we can do is to share our success stories, find those champions, find those creative campuses that are willing to go out first and try something. And that's why we collect those narratives and we push those narratives out. And we really provide a lot of platforms for knowledge sharing, so all of these things can be replicated. So again, I wanted to end with talking about what we're going to change in the future. We did run up against some issues when vendors try to talk to our procurement officers and our event planners, the people that are not necessarily closely related to the sustainability office. So the policy is really confusing. So we're going to create some job aids to explain to them like what the difference is between photo degradation and compostable and what you can or what you cannot buy after we sort of parse through some of the questions that we get. We are going to open up our definitions of a couple of things, like BPI is not the only compostable product out there, certification anymore. And also the vendors will tell the procurement officers or the event planners things like, well, this isn't single use. People reuse our water bottles all the time. When you're done using it, you can just refill it. That's not exactly what we mean by single use, so we need to define that. And then we need a separate policy, or at least encourage the campuses to create their own policy on swag, because that's not single use items, but they're also not necessary items. And then finally, our reporting is going to get so much easier. Instead of saying like what size cup, how many did they come in a package, I'm just going to say how many cups did you buy? So we've got to streamline our reporting, because if the reporting is easier, the data will be better. And that really is a really great road path to implementation. So that's all I have. And I can take some questions if there are any.
Well, thank you, Sadie. That was great. Super interesting. I didn't see any questions come in, but was wondering if you could provide any detail on one of like your favorite success stories, because I think that's like such a big project that you guys have taken on, and it seems like it would be hard to even figure out where to start. But like you said, there's the stirrers, but is there a success story that you wanted to highlight of a particular type of plastic?
So I think this is like the most interesting success story, but one thing that because I'm from the administrative offices, I love to see people sharing best practices and just really making use of the systemness of our system. And so the reusable dining to go containers, they're used, in the cafes as well as like, in the dining halls. If you don't finish, you can take them. But those are huge because everyone's on the go these days, and everybody likes to stop at the little cafes versus going necessarily, So anyway, campuses have learned so much from each other because that was one of the first things that they started doing. And so not only are they talking about like what works for you and what doesn't work for you, but they talk about like they've found a company that will help them track where the containers are, because they found that like charging 50 cents per container you don't get the container back. So, this one campus was like, well, we found this company and we invested in it, but the number of containers that we get back now, it paid for itself, right? So now everybody's going to go and like get that company. Or they say like, what do you do about the ones that end up in the dorms? And like, we don't have the human power to like collect all the ones from the dorms. Like, how do we do that, right? And so one campus will say like, well, do you have eco ambassadors? We have the students, we have our eco ambassadors do that. It's like, oh yeah. So I love that example because it just shows what, sharing stories and best management practices can do.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's really cool that they're able to do that. Are there like is it like an email chain or a chat group that people share in, or do you guys actually bring people together and
We
share
do a
that
lot
information?
of bringing people
Okay.
together. The
Very
emails
cool.
will go around. The alternatives to balloons is something people really had to share this month because
Oh, graduation.
it's graduation, right? And so some of the events people were just waking up to like, wait a minute, you mean this means balloons? So that was a lot of emails going around about what did you find? Can we get this on state contract? Blah, 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 stuff like that. And that was great sharing among emails. But we just bring people together a lot. We do have a listserv. We have an annual conference where we all come together in person. Then we have a shorter 1 day roundtable where people come together in the winter. We have quarterly meetings, which are webinars, and people share. We have a session during those called Pass the Mic. And then we just try to host like different, let's say one-off like deep dive webinars just on like the topic at hand. So yes, we provide a lot of platforms. It's a very chatty sharing group across our 64 campuses, I think.
Very cool. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in, so thank you so much, Sadie. It was really interesting to hear about your guys' work.
Thank you for having me.
And then the next up is Paige, and she's going to be talking about the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Native Plant Nursery.
Figure out how to get this sharing. How's that looking?
I can see your slides.
Perfect. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Paige Buzard. I'm a landscape architect with the Center for Watershed Protection. And I'll be talking about the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's native plant nursery in terms of this case study. I do want to start with an acknowledgement that this case study and presentation is an overview of the native plant nursery operated by the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, and it's meant to highlight their work and accomplishments. I'm not affiliated with the tribe and do not represent the community, but the Center for Watershed Protection was fortunate enough to have an interview with McKay Burley, a native plant nursery technician of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Environment Division, for the information provided in this presentation. Additional information was gathered from publicly available online interviews with Jessica Rathbissa, an environmental specialist with the Environment Division, and various other online resources. I'd also like to extend a special acknowledgement to Les Benedict of the tribe, who served on our advisory committee, and Grant Jonathan of the EPA, who fostered the connection between the Center for Watershed Protection and the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. We are grateful for the opportunity to have learned from their work and the tribe's ongoing efforts, and we'll do our best to highlight how the native plant nursery is a standout example of how pollution prevention and stormwater management best practices can be incorporated into tribal and municipal nursery production and also plant installation operations. So to help orient everybody geographically, the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe is located in northern New York State, north of the Adirondack Mountains and along the international border with Canada. The community is situated along the shores of the St. Lawrence River, which has a highly interconnected river and wetland system. They are located around three major waterways, the Raquette River, the St. Regis River, and the St. Lawrence River, shown on the map subset. And now we'll jump into the organizational structure that makes the native plant nursery possible. The St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Environmental Division leads a wide range of environmental protection and restoration efforts throughout Akwesasne, including water quality work, habitat restoration, and climate resilience initiatives. The native plant nursery was established in 2018 and operates under the guidance of a native plant working group, which I'll touch on a little bit later. The nursery has developed a propagation guide for locally significant plants, but at the nursery itself, it prioritizes a small number of species each year for seed collection and propagation. And those species are selected by the Native Plant Working Group. These plants are not only of ecological value, but also have a deep cultural significance related to food, medicine, shelter, textiles, and ceremonies. The nursery's work is meant to support both the environmental restoration efforts and cultural connections to the land and plant species. Also, in addition to growing plants, the nursery engages in community outreach and education efforts that help strengthen the relationship that communities have with native plants and the local ecosystem. There are 5 main goals of the Native Plant Nursery, which can be found on the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Environment Division webpage. They are to build and develop sustainable tribal resource management capacities to propagate those native plants on tribal lands, to develop a tribal native plant nursery and greenhouse pilot project, to establish native plant supplies for restoration efforts. Those restoration efforts range from park development, from reforestation, and invasive species management and revegetation along waterways. Another goal is to outplant native plants to restore degraded tribal lands, increase community awareness and education concerning the benefits and processes of producing and propagating natives, and building and expanding strong partnerships and support networks. These goals reflect the idea that native plants are not just functional for restoration materials, but they're also tied to ecological relationships, cultural practices, and community connections to the land and waterways. So now, how does the nursery decide what to grow? One of the early challenges identified by the tribe, shared to us by McKay Burley, was that many of the native plant species that were desirable for restoration projects and for cultural purposes were either difficult to source commercially or unavailable in the quantities that were needed. And so in response, the Native Plant Working Group and the Native Plant Nursery began focusing on collecting seeds and species in the form of cuttings from regionally native plants, providing them with the material that would be better adapted to local soils, climate conditions, and the hydrologic systems that they see at Akwesasne. Their radius for collection is primarily locally on tribal lands, but also extends to about a 100-mile radius, including some of the region's state parks where some tree species seeds can be collected. From a restoration and stormwater perspective, this is important because the locally adapted plants are typically more resilient and will require fewer long-term maintenance inputs such as irrigation, fertilizer, or replacement plantings, which also plays a little bit into our stormwater pollution prevention actions. The Native Plant Working Group plays a major role in helping to guide what the native plant priorities will be. The group brings together community members with a broad range of knowledge and interests, including medicine people, traditional seed keepers, restoration staff, beekeepers, and arborists, among others. The working group also supports broader community stewardship efforts through seed exchanges, educational workshops, ecological restoration activities like group planting projects, and the Akwesasne Seed Symposium. McKay Burley, the native plant technician at the nursery, shared with us that participation in their seed collection and seed exchange program has grown threefold in the past year to about 50 community participants now. So they're seeing great success and interest in these native plants and seed collection initiatives. The nursery grows a variety of native plant species. It was a little challenging to nail down exactly what they were growing at what time. As their capacity builds, they'll be adding more variety to their native plant nursery. But for these purposes, I'll explain some of the important ones for the restoration work, which include willow species such as black and silky willow. They are especially valuable in riparian and shoreline restoration settings because of their ability to stabilize soils and tolerate wet conditions, and their ability to be planted as live stakes. So they can be harvested from the environment in the form of cuttings and directly placed into stream banks to start that stabilization process. Rhodosier dogwood is another species produced at the nursery that can be used in restoration plantings and is well suited for stream banks and other revegetation projects. And the nursery also works with culturally significant plants such as sweetgrass, which holds important traditional and ceremonial value. The nursery works with student groups and other community groups to harvest and bring the sweetgrass plants into the nursery to expand the propagation of that plant specifically. And they're working on monitoring and calculating how the expansion of sweetgrass can happen at the nursery. They're also involved in black ash seed collection and preservation efforts, which is particularly important to the people because Akwesasne, like many areas throughout the region, have experienced significant impacts from the emerald ash borer. So the ash species make up a substantial portion of the local forest canopy in most of New York as well. So the loss of these trees doesn't just affect forest health and habitat, but it also affects stormwater runoff, interception, and soil infiltration as we start to lose these trees from our forests. For the St. Regis Mohawk tribe, the black ash also has an important cultural significance, particularly for traditional basket making practices. So the seed collection efforts are helping preserve that genetic stock, especially in the local area, in hopes that these trees may once again be replanted more broadly, if and hopefully when the emerald ash borer impacts are reduced or managed. Right now, they are not actively replanting ash trees because the likelihood that those seedlings will perish are pretty high. So nursery practices. This slide introduced several of the core operational practices that are used at the nursery that contribute to both successful plant production and broader environmental benefits. Many of these practices are intentionally low input approaches. They emphasize locally adapted native plants, reduced water and fertilizer demand, soil protection through mulching, rainwater harvesting or conservation methods, and a bare root production method that all lower overall material and resource use. The next few slides will look at each of these topics in a little bit more detail and explain how they support nursery efficiency, restoration success, and water quality protection. I'll start with discussing the native plant selection since that really serves as the foundation for many of the other operational and environmental benefits. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, one of the foundational practices of the nursery is the selection of these locally adapted and culturally significant native plant species. Many of these plants are harvested from tribal lands, from local forests and gardens, but they also have seed collectors going out into the broader community to source seeds and cuttings that will be propagated back at the nursery. The native plants are important to the tribe for traditional practices, but also because they maintain the existing ecosystems that are present throughout their landscape. Many of these plants support habitat and food sources for local wildlife and pollinators, and the deep root systems that native plants produce help stabilize soils, improve infiltration, and reduce erosion, which is especially important for the stream bank initiatives throughout the tribal lands. From an operational standpoint, these plants are great to grow at a nursery because they typically require fewer external inputs, both at the nursery and when they're planted on a project site. So they'll require less supplemental irrigation because they're adapted to those local climate conditions, and little to no synthetic fertilizer as they're well adapted to the soil types in the region. That reduction in maintenance inputs directly aligns with pollution prevention and sustainable landscape management goals. And the nursery has also begun using mulch during the growing process. The mulch is produced from wood chips generated through an existing program at the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, which is the Hazard Tree Assessment and Down Woody Debris Program, where members can have their hazardous trees removed, or if down trees have fallen, they are collected and chipped at a municipal facility, and then those wood chips can then be reused by the native plant nursery around plants that are being propagated. So instead of treating this material as a waste, it gets to be repurposed to benefit nursery operations. Initially, it was described as sort of an experiment. The nursery was testing out different methods of retaining soil moisture during periods of drought so that they wouldn't have to supplement with an additional water. So they tried a few different methods and were pleasantly surprised to see that mulch was improving plant survival during the hotter periods of summer when rainfall was a little less prevalent. So the mulch helps retain soil moisture, reducing irrigation demand, but it also moderates soil temperature during the summer, which can help reduce plant stress, which is really great when you're trying to start out little seedlings. And it also suppresses weed growth, which lowers the overall maintenance needs and puts a little less demand on the nursery staff. Bare root production is another important practice at the nursery, although it's not applied uniformly across all species. Instead, it is used where it makes sense from a propagation standpoint. So you can see the two different pictures here. The larger one on the bottom of the screen shows that some of the plants are still propagated using the plastic containers that we typically see in landscape applications. But on the left-hand side, these are bundles of plants that have been propagated and are about to be planted in kind of in a bare root format. So you don't see the extra soil sitting around the root balls. There's no plastic involved in these plantings, and they'd be directly applied to the ground. So sweetgrass is one of the species at the nursery that has been grown and planted using the bare root methods. That means they can expand the amount of land that is used for the propagation of the sweetgrass and manage larger swaths of it at one time instead of planting individual plugs in plug trays or these plastic containers. The idea behind a bare root plant production is that the plants are grown and transplanted without that container, allowing the roots to establish more directly into the native soils once they are installed at their restoration sites. A little similar to taking a cutting of a plant and directly inserting it into a stream bank as a live stake. As I mentioned, the bare root planting method has several benefits. It reduces the use of plastic containers that might be associated with waste streams. It eliminates the concern that some of these plastics are breaking down in the sunlight and becoming pollutants in stormwater runoff. But it also reduces irrigation demand during the production and propagation process compared to the traditional container growing systems, because as you water one large area, that moisture can spread out and help to water all of the plants in the area instead of just isolated container by container. This focus on reducing inputs and improving establishment continues into the next practice, which looks at how the nursery meets plant water demand needs, in part through rainwater harvesting. So water management at the nursery does use a combination of both passive and supplemental systems. A key feature of passive rainwater capture includes earthworks such as swales and infiltration areas. So if you have a structure like a greenhouse, a building, or a hoop house, the runoff that hits those surfaces flows over the land, can be collected and directed in a swale to a lower area where you have your nursery stock planted in order to infiltrate that water around the site of your growing native plants. These systems help capture the site runoff and allow it to infiltrate into the soil, supporting plant hydration and reducing the need for active irrigation. But the nursery is still connected to a municipal water supply, which they do use for supplemental irrigation during drought periods or times where the plants might have a higher water demand. Their goal is not full independence from potable water, but rather reducing the demand wherever possible and using rainwater as the primary support mechanism when conditions allow. Coupling that with mulching helps promote soil moisture being retained and contributes to the propagation plant success. And then the next step is where these practices start to translate to on-the-ground impact, where the plants produced at the nursery are installed and used in restoration and revegetation projects and public park projects. This is where I think there is more overlap with other municipal facilities. Not everyone is going to have the ability to staff a native plant nursery or the land to establish one, but keeping in mind that the choice of selecting native plants that are adapted to your local region can start to bring some similar benefits to the sites around your municipality. So the native plants, what are they used for? All of the plants grown at the native plant nursery in Akwesasne are used for public projects. That includes parks, shoreline restoration projects, and revegetation projects after invasive shoreline removal. They're also used in forest management initiatives, such as the urban forestry plan to revamp some of the forest loss. At this time, the nursery is not providing any plants for sales in a commercial capacity. Their production goes entirely to these public projects. I mentioned the Shoreline Invasive Plant Project, and that's where a good portion of these species will be installed. So the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's Shoreline Invasive Plant Project restored over 47,000 square feet of shoreline as of 2022. They have been removing invasive Phragmites, Japanese knotweed, and common and glossy buckthorn, among others. And after using integrated pest management approaches and waiting a year of seeing no new invasive growth, the shorelines are restored with native plants such as the willow, dogwoods, and sweetgrass, all produced at the nursery. The plants are also used in post-construction projects where disturbed soils need to be stabilized and revegetated to restore the ecological function and reduce erosion and runoff. We can take a look at some of these projects showcased at the bottom. So the one on the bottom left is the Racket River Boat Launch Project, which included a shoreline buffer restoration and native plantings along disturbed areas of the St. Lawrence River corridor. This image is from an environmental assessment form that was submitted along with the park permitting application. And it stated that approximately 15,000 square feet of stream buffer would be disturbed in the construction process, but that native riparian buffer plantings, likely grown at the native plant nursery, would be installed to mitigate that. Additional native shade trees were planned around the parking lot and walkways, with construction set to begin in the summer of 2024. Have not been able to see it since, but I'm sure that some native plants produced at the nursery were incorporated into this installation. Similarly, the Scannon Park Revitalization Project was incorporating native trees and plants into both recreational landscaping and riparian buffer areas along the St. Lawrence River This specific site is on either side of the former Hogansburg Dam on the St. Lawrence River. And according to that environmental assessment form, the project incorporated the development of 2 recreational park spaces, one on the east and one on the west side of the river, with planting installations being associated with recreational landscaping, but also riparian buffer areas to promote habitat restoration and water quality protection. By the spring of 2024, the east side of the park had been completed, and during a site visit, the Center for Watershed Protection did have the pleasure of touring this particular site, with construction for the west side of the park beginning shortly after. Unfortunately, neither of the environmental assessment forms outlined exactly which species were selected for planting at either of these project sites, but one can infer that at least some of the plants specified for the riparian buffers and shorelines have been sourced from the native plant nursery. Outside of the plants that they were able to produce and install from the native plant nursery, the St. Regis Mohawk tribe has a good relationship with the New York State DEC Native Tree Nursery in Saratoga Springs, New York, where they do source quite a bit of their native tree species for planting in similar projects. And this final slide focuses on what happens after installation of native plants. The maintenance and long-term performance may differ depending upon the site. The idea and the application to other municipalities and other tribes falls upon the decision to make your plantings out of selecting natives and perhaps even bare root nursery stock. The maintenance responsibility for projects in the St. Regis Mohawk tribe, the responsibility depends on the site. Sometimes those shoreline restoration projects cross over onto private property, where the maintenance is typically the responsibility of the property owner, while on public lands such as parks, maintenance is supported through tribal operations. Some property owners were noted to be very passionate about their shoreline restoration projects and have done a great job maintaining plants along the shoreline and are really proud to have those native plants and to be able to restore the habitat for wildlife. Immediately after planting, especially some of those trees in public park sites, tree protection is often installed to prevent accidental damage from mowing equipment and things like weed whackers, which can severely injure the trees and cause a need for replacement. And during establishment, supplemental watering may still be used. It was mentioned that particularly on the public park projects, during periods of drought when those plants are still establishing and spreading their roots out, watering trucks may be used and brought on site to supplement the natural rainfall. No synthetic fertilizers are applied after planting. The system is designed around selecting plants that are already adapted to the local soil conditions. So rather than trying to force growth through chemical inputs, the tribe relies on the plant's natural capabilities to adapt to the soil. This is especially important because additional nutrients are not recommended for restoration plantings, where the goal is to maintain natural nutrient cycling and avoid excess nutrient inputs that could contribute to downstream water quality impacts. And with that, I want to give a special thanks. This case study was made possible through the support and participation of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Environment Division and tribal staff, including McKay Burley, the Akwesasne native plant nursery technician who graciously participated in our case study interview, Jessica Ratpitha, an environmental resource coordinator whose work supports the native plant nursery and whose online interviews were vital in supporting our understanding of these practices. Les Benedict of the St. Regis Mohawk tribe, whose efforts in establishing the native plant nursery and fostering the collaboration with the Center for Watershed Protection for the purposes of this case study cannot be understated. And Grant Jonathan of EPA Region 2, the Regional Tribal Program Manager, for his role in supporting the interagency coordination and connection. I am sure that there are many others who also deserve recognition, both for their contributions to the native plant nursery, to the native plant working group, and for their broader involvement in the restoration and stewardship work that made these efforts and ongoing efforts possible. In addition to our case study connections, we also drew from a range of publicly available references and public documentation to help supplement and clarify details for some of the practices and restoration projects discussed throughout this case study. I want to emphasize again that I'm not representing the tribe. I'm only sharing a summary of what I was able to learn through interviews with the nursery staff, the site visit that we went on in May of 2024, and additional research online. The work itself and the leadership behind it belongs entirely to the St. Regis Mohawk tribe and the community members driving the restoration and stewardship efforts. With all of that said, I'm happy to take questions, but as it's not my personal project, I may not have all of the answers. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Paige. That was a great summary of the work done at the plant nursery. There haven't been any questions coming in, but if you have any questions, you can reach out. I will actually I'm going to post our last slide, which is contact information. Sorry, it's going to take me a second to remember how to share. Let's see. Okay. So I have my contact information. Everyone is welcome if there are questions that come up based on the information you received on the native plant nursery or any of the other case studies, and I can connect you or at least provide contacts for those questions. I did also include the QR code again to the toolkit. All the 3 case studies that we talked about today, as well as an additional case studies produced by this project, are all on the toolkit. And so there's a variety of other topics addressed, P2 good housekeeping nexuses that were addressed in those case studies as well. And I think that is our material for today. There are a few extra minutes, I think, in the scheduled webcast. We'll sign off, but please remember to fill out that post-webcast evaluation form, especially since there's a little bit of extra time now. We really appreciate all the feedback that you can provide. And with that, I thank you guys for joining us today.